sisi keleli Afrika, malupaganisu pondolwayo, litwa imitandazo yetu Nkosi sikelela.
Hello and welcome to another CSRM podcast. Today I'm with CSRM's director, national director for South Africa, the country of South Africa, Bradley Barnes. Bradley, welcome.
Thank you.
It's great to be with you. We are here. We've just completed a week together at the Reach Gathering. And for those of you that missed it, you can get some of the videos, let us know of some of the sessions, of the main plenary speakers, and some of the various seminars and workshops that we had. But you certainly don't want to miss next year's. That'll be at Ridgecrest, second year in a row at Ridgecrest, and we're going to be right back there in North Carolina, April 9 to 11 of 2019. And that's what brought you here, Bradley, was the Reach. You came and joined us, and you've been spending now the next week. Bradley's been going around and speaking at various churches and developing some relationships with a lot of people. And I have really enjoyed our time together. I treated Bradley yesterday to the first Irish meal that he's ever had.
In the USA.
Oh, now we get a clarification. Mm-hmm. But he had that shepherd's pie that he said was great.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so we were sitting on the shores of Lake Erie looking out and eating that shepherd's pie, and all of you should be very envious of that because it was a great time.
Should be, indeed.
But Bradley, you are now the CSRM director for South Africa.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about South Africa. In America, we have states.
We have provinces in South Africa.
And how many of them are there?
And we have 9 provinces in South Africa, with a little country in the middle of South Africa called Lesotho.
Yeah, and that's something that people don't know about in America much of all. But obviously, South Africa has had some racial tension through the years, apartheid. We have our own problems in America with slavery and the ongoing. We've got real racism. Right now, when this is being videoed in 2018, I think our country's probably as divided racially as I've seen it for a long time. And no matter where it is, where you go in the world, there seems to be some sort of strife like that. And yet you are trying to bring some healing and restoration in various ways there. Tell us a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, well, I can vouch for the term racial tension and slavery to some extent. Mm-hmm. I was born in the era where there was total dividends and racial tension in South Africa, where non-white people had to walk with their identification in their back pockets or their front pockets between sunrise and sunset. So as I'm sitting here, I'm still sitting with my passport on me because it's just part of me. But I grew up in the time in South Africa where it was a challenge to get an education at a decent level to get you into college, university. And my time in South Africa, my first few years living in South Africa, has been a frustrating challenge. I did not understand from a young age. Growing up, I was born in a hospital.
Now that sounds strange in America for you to say that.
Yeah.
What's the significance of that in South Africa?
At that time, a non-white would have given, a lady would have given birth at home.
Yes.
And a home nurse would come to the home. And because the hospital wasn't for everybody at that time, for every race. And that led me to living and starting life, under a lovely big tree, awoken, by the sun early morning. But as the years went on, I didn't understand why I wasn't able to just go to the local beach and swim. I didn't understand why I couldn't go to a certain school. I couldn't understand why I wasn't allowed on a specific public transport. And it was years later when I was fortunate to be the first non-white kid at a all-white school, just when Nelson Mandela was released.
Now let's stop there for a second, because we've got people that are watching this, or they may be on their treadmill with the ear pods listening,
Yeah.
or they're commuting to work and listening to this podcast, who don't know who Nelson Mandela is, as sad as that may be, and that there are maybe a younger generation that are tuning into this that can't believe what you're just saying, that a non-white was not going to be born in a hospital. And yet we had that here in America too. And there are people that are my age and maybe even a little younger that was still true for them because of some of these incredible, unwritten but incredible laws. And some of them were written laws in our country.
Back home as well.
So, who was Nelson Mandela?
Well, first of all, I need to tell you that I share the same birth date with Nelson Mandela,
Oh, yeah.
which is the 18th of July, which is now a public holiday in South Africa. I don't refer him to Nelson Mandela. I refer him to as the great Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela was a non-white who refused to just accept the current law in South Africa, which divided races and different genders even. And Nelson Mandela was put in jail because of his stand for people, freedom and equality. And he was detained, he was put in prison, he was sentenced, he was tried, and he was sentenced to a point where they took part of his freedom, part of his equality away. But Nelson Mandela was a true fighter for our country, where he did not look at his situation and he did not say this is the end. Nelson Mandela was a pioneer, one of the most influential political leaders in South Africa.
In the world.
In the world. I only came to know that when he was released from prison.
Right.
How powerful he was internationally.
Right.
Nelson Mandela was kind of the father figure who fought for freedom and equality in South
Right.
Africa, to a point where he gave up his own life
Yes.
to be prisoned for.
Now, he wasn't assassinated, but he gave up his life in that he spent decades in prison.
Correct, 27 years in prison.
And we have had the privilege of communicating and knowing the man who was his prison chaplain for many of those, if not all of those years.
Correct.
And even he says some really outstanding things about Nelson Mandela. And so for those of us that are in America, we're recording this in America, that may not know some of this, the best that we might do in America to have a parallel would be Martin Luther King Jr.
Okay.
or some other civil rights leaders that led in this way. And unfortunately, Martin was assassinated in America.
Yeah.
I think he would have preferred to go to prison, quite honestly. I don't know that. I can't say that. But we do know that he was assassinated. And so these things are part of our culture. And sadly, it's not just one country, but it's around the world. And those of you that are usually tuned into this say, I thought this was about sports, rec, and fitness ministries. We're getting to that.
Absolutely.
We're getting to that. But you have to understand the context of which Bradley works and why this sports, rec, and fitness outreach that we do through local churches is so important.
Absolutely, Greg.
Speak to that a little bit.
My upbringing in South Africa did not allow me to play sport with all races. And it was only when I received a high school scholarship that I was able to connect and learn and understand the culture of a different race in South Africa. And that pushed me to have a passion for people. And it helped me understand that I have to respect another human being, more so from another culture.
And you then have parlayed that into some things that we'll come to in a little bit in terms of how you use sport. But let's hover there a little bit on your own personal sporting world, and how did you you played football,
Soccer.
not soccer.
Yeah.
We call it soccer, but the rest of the world calls it football.
Yeah.
It's amazing that
Yeah.
that you actually call it what it is. You play a game with a ball, you play with your feet,
Yeah.
and we call it soccer, and then we call football where you run with it in your hands and
Yeah.
throw with it. But nonetheless,
Yeah.
you're modest, but you have played at a very high level. But give us that trajectory of where did you start and kind of what was the highest level that you played at.
Okay. Well, I started like any kid, and I don't want to say in Africa, but I think all around the world, in the street. I started barefoot, playing in the street, because that was the only freedom I had, which was in the street between sunset and sunrise, and football was the only equipment that was available. So I started playing this game of football and understanding it in the streets with older people, and I did not enjoy it at first because I was bullied. I was playing with people 10 years my age. But it helped me to endure what was laying before me, and it took me to a point where I was fortunate to play national football for South Africa,
For the national team.
the national team. Football allowed me to play in Denmark, and it also allowed me to a point where I was able to use that now within sports ministry much more globally.
So now, when you say you played for the national team, what did the national team, how did they compete, and what venues?
Interesting that you asked that question, Greg. At the time when I was playing for the national team, we were not yet integrated into the international football, which they now call FIFA. So I was only
Was that because of some of the apartheid issues that the world said no?
That were some of the apartheid issues as well,
Uh-huh.
which had the most weight on our decision playing outside of
Yes.
outside of the African continent.
Yes.
I was fortunate to play in various countries in South Africa, and it took me from the south to the central to the north of Africa, and it started through school football.
Yeah.
And it led me to having a adventurous lifetime in football.
Yeah. Striker, defender, all of the above.
Defensive midfielder, so
Yes.
I was the guy that made sure that we don't lose the game
Yeah.
or conceding goals.
Right. And how long was your career?
My career was very short. It started at the age of, I would say my national career started at the age of 14.
Uh-huh.
Worked myself up, and at the age of 23, I called it quits.
23.
Very young.
You were an old man.
It felt, it felt like that at that stage.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so you now have a couple of young sons. And are they following in your footsteps playing?
I can, as a proud dad, I can say my 15-year-old son is probably going to be better than what I was. Yeah.
And how is it now being the father of athletes?
Well, I certainly respect the athlete more, and I also respect the coach more, and I also respect the football more.
Okay, now you're speaking to people out here that are in the local church and they're doing these sports rec. They deal with fathers like you all the time because they got their kids out there. Some of them are living vicariously, meaning
Yeah.
I didn't make it, but my kid's going to make it,
Yeah.
and all that kind of stuff. we have any words of wisdom for the sports minister out there in dealing with football, soccer dads?
Oh yeah, I'm a current semi-pro football coach, and I deal with the youth. And it's interesting how passionate the fathers are
Oh,
on the sideline, sometimes more than the coach itself. But to those coaches out there, um, my advice to you is see the child as your child during the game time
ooh,
and put the earplugs in, not listening to the fathers of that. But my encouragement would be you be the father figure, you be the example of a good father in that time for these kids, because that might be the only time that these kids experience fatherhood.
I have a good friend who said his way of dealing with it as a father, he had both a daughter and a son that played basketball, was he said he put a pencil in his mouth. And if he needed to growl at something, he could just growl and chew on that pencil. And I said, well, why don't you use a pen? And he said, because I did use a pen. I mean, every time I snap it, I get ink all over me. Pencils weren't so bad.
That's so bad, yeah.
And that was his way of dealing with that. But you know, in sports ministry, we have that issue with those parents. And if you're not a parent of a child in athletics, you really don't understand. You want your kid to do so well. And we have to make sure, don't we, that we're running that balance and understanding how much of this is reflecting on me and my own ego and my own pride. Yeah. And we have to really get rid of that, don't we?
Absolutely, Greg. It's still a challenge to me. Sometimes when my son plays, I see things different on the field than the coach. But I've learned to realize that I'm only giving my son an opportunity to have fun. Mm-hmm. And when I signed up for my son to play, I gave ownership of my son to the coach. And so I have to respect that.
And it begs the question that we have to really be judicious about the coach that we're releasing our child to.
Absolutely.
We have to choose well, but in our local churches, we have to provide those kind of coaches, people.
And that is why I have this passion for local church and the sports ministry to build up, to develop this model educated coach so that the parent won't have a finger to point to this coach during practice, during match day.
Right. So there's a lot here that we hope that you can take away in thinking about how do you go and deal with parents, how do you react as a parent. I coached both of my kids. We had 12 years of school before they went into the higher academia. And of those 12 years, I coached both my daughter and my son 10 of those 12 years.
Wow.
And I was able to coach them in their last couple of years, but there was a couple of years come middle school or early high school that I didn't. And that was difficult. That was very difficult. But the one thing that I always said to my children was that lots of people can call me coach, but only you can call me dad. And all of these are children of somebody, but you're my only two children. And that has to take precedence over anything else.
I fully agree. I'm in the same situation back in South Africa where I coach a lot of kids, and I have my kids involved, my two boys involved, and they know that during that time that I treat them fair, but they know when that time is up that it's their dad's time. And I know the pressure that comes with that, especially for a coach that has kids, that is not even involved, but watching your dad being a coach and your dad giving everything to that child in that moment of practice. And that is why I have this passion to equip and to coach and to lead and to build up these coaches that I hope would come out to the local church.
So we have a great opportunity, don't we?
Absolutely, Greg. We in sports ministry we kind of have this huge opportunity to allow us to offer a coach with a solid foundation, a solid biblical foundation, and a good knowledge of sports, and how we integrate that two together can actually change society. And I've seen that happen in South Africa.
Right. Well, we're about ready to land this plane on this segment.
Yeah.
And we're going to ask you to stick around and come back for another segment here.
Lovely.
And we're going to wrap this up. And those of you that are listening or you're watching, whatever you may be doing with this podcast, we thank you for tuning into this. And we're going to be back with Bradley Barnes in another segment. And we're going to start there. We're going to talk about how your sporting background led you into some ministry, and sports ministry in particular, and talk about that from that perspective. We're going to have some more insights for you about your leagues, your youth leagues, maybe even your adult leagues, and some of the ways that you can maximize your position, your facility, your equipment for Jesus Christ.
Absolutely.
And helping people come to a strong faith, but also an integration of their faith in sport. So, thanks, Bradley, for being with us, and we'll look forward to seeing you in the next one.
Thank you so much.